Oh, look, I have my first question. Can I buy you a beer?
Softball.
Okay, yeah, softball, exactly. Oh, it's you. Well, I think someone will probably bring one. That'll be good. I think we should have one.
All right, I don't think I need to make any introductions, but I will. My name's Autumn Phillips. I'm the managing editor of the Post and Courier. We had this idea about 6 months ago that people might want to drink beer and talk politics, and it turns out they do. This is a pretty casual conversation, but definitely. But please let Caitlin, our political reporter, and Skylar Prof, our political editor, ask the questions. We got more than 50 questions submitted from readers. As you came in, we chose the ones I believe we have time for, and I will let them get started.
All right, that sounds good.
Just sit down.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Give me a second.
We're all going to get situated here.
Everyone hear me okay?
We're still learning how to do this, so thanks for hanging around.
How's that? Better? Better?
No.
You have to shout that.
Faster to go. Thank you.
All right, this is our first. You guys ready? That's okay?
We're looking.
All right. Who is Amy Kobuchar? She is a Democratic U.S. Senator from Minnesota, first elected in 2006 and again in 2012 and 2018. Previously, she was the elected attorney for Hennepin County, and that means she was the prosecutor, and she also a corporate attorney. According to the site 538, she has voted with President Donald Trump just 29% of the time. But that is still higher, a higher score than any of the other senators running for president this year. Rough crowd. Some of her key votes are against the 2017 tax cut bill, against efforts to scale back the Affordable Care Act, and against the Supreme Court nominations of Neil Gorsuch and California. She entered the presidential race in February on a very snowy day. She and her family live in Plymouth, Minnesota, and she is the first female to represent Minnesota in the Senate.
All right. And so with that
I will
introduction,
note that it was about 100 degrees colder than it is today. And I had 4 inches of snow on my head, and the woman that did my hair became an icon. Never moved at all.
that's impressive. There's a reason why my hair is pulled back today. My name's Caitlin Bird. I'm a political reporter here at the Post and Courier. I write the Palmetto Politics newsletter. Please sign up for it. It's free, Monday through Friday. And so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll just start off, is Donald Trump a racist?
Well, I think he is. I've said that several times. But I think the bigger question here is the corrosive effect of what he says and does every single day on our politics in our country. I want to make sure, can you all hear me here? And I am someone, the reason I did announce in that snowy day in the middle of that river is that on an island, I think we need to cross the river of our divides to get to a higher place in our politics. And that means, like, after Charlottesville, no, when the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists are on the other side, there are not 2 sides. There is only one side, and that is the American side. And my focus from the beginning of this, when you look at my announcement speech, and I have not wavered, is about one America, to bring us together. That's my track record. I have led over 100 bills where I'm the lead Democrat and gotten them passed. And I am someone that believes that you got to find common ground. That doesn't mean you don't stand your ground, but you do have to look for it, because it's the only way we're going to bring this country together to govern. It's one of the reasons that I've won 42 of the counties Donald Trump won in my state, and I've won every congressional district every time, including Michelle Bachmann's. Of what's happening to our country, having just been in Columbia and before that in Little Rock, Arkansas, with parents that have lost their kids to gun violence, is we are living with the president right now that I think he's afraid. He is afraid of the NRA, and every time he thinks they're going after him, then he goes, okay, I'm not going to do anything about background checks. He's afraid of science. He doesn't do anything on climate change. He is afraid of having people have an equal seat at the table, which is a lot of what racial opportunity is about, and racial injustice. And he is certainly afraid of having a woman in the White House.
So, on that theme of unity, though, but how do you use his own, in your words, corrosive performance and words against him to replace him?
Okay, that's a great question. And I think my first answer there is 2018, right? When you elected Joe Cunningham, by the way. And that is that in 2018, there was people that were unhappy with the economy. And even though we've seen stability in our economy, wherever I go, there's a bad weather event. You should view it as a form of good luck. And if people want to, I think we can come in. There is some room here. If people want to spread in. Move in, everyone move in a little bit. Come on, close. I don't care. I'm from the Midwest. Everyone want to move in. It works for me. Everyone inside now, and there's some room over here, room in there. Okay, so the question was about taking him on with his words. And I think that there are a few things that we've learned. One, in 2018, how did we win? We had an optimistic economic agenda for this country, taking on the challenges of our time, right? Joe Cunningham talked about the problems of offshore drilling here, right? We had people talking about not kicking people off their health insurance for pre-existing conditions. I remember being in a small town parade and this woman pointed to her child in a stroller. She says, this is my son, and he has Down syndrome, and I would do anything to fight for his health care. And then she said, this is what a pre-existing condition looks like. And I think the reason that became so prevalent, those words that just don't come off the tip of your tongue, is because we were together and had an economic message for people. So that's my one thing. It's not necessarily using his words, that's what he wants us to do, right? It is leading with our own optimistic economic agenda to unite this country and to unite South Carolina. That's my first thing. The second is when he says horrendous racist things, yes, you call him on it, you stand your ground, you say what you think. Okay, and we do that all the time. But it doesn't mean you go down every rabbit hole with him, right? You don't go every rabbit hole because that's what he wants. You go on, you know, my dad was a big sports reporter and covered the Vikings, right? Well, that's a whole other story. But the best defense is a good offense, right? So like yesterday, by the way, I think part of how you take this guy on, you're going to be surprised, I think you have to use some humor. And it is one of my strengths. Why? Because he uses humor, you just don't think it's funny. You have to show how absurd he is. So when I did that announcement, he made fun of me for talking about climate change in the middle of a snowstorm. And then I wrote back a few hours later on Twitter, I did this myself at the airport, I said, Donald Trump, the science is on my side on climate change, and I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blue. Yesterday I did one and I said, what's the difference between Donald Trump and Greenland? Greenland is not for sale. You need to call him on what he is and not always kind of go with the punches with this guy, because he is trying to dominate the news every single day, so we talk with his words and his terms. He does not care if it hurts people's feelings. He does not care if he's using these kids as pawns on the border and people are dying. No, he does not care about what's happening to these farmers and workers who are basically poker chips at one of his bankrupt casinos. So you've got to get that in your head, as hard as it is for patriotic Americans to do that. to me, one of the defining moments was when he was asked about Russian invasion in our election at the G20, standing next to Vladimir Putin. And he turned to Putin and made a joke about it. That was just recently. You think about the patriotism of this state of South Carolina and all the veterans. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives on battlefields, fighting for that right to protect our democracy, fighting for the right to vote. 4 little girls lost their life in a church in Birmingham at the height of the civil rights movement because people were standing up for that democracy and the right to vote. So this is not a joke at all. But at the same time, you got to think strategically about how you take it on. And I believe, number one, foremost, our own economic agenda. But then thinking about how you deal with him, because he is trying to distract and he does not have the best interests of our country in mind. And I believe our country is so much bigger than this. When I was in Iowa with a big flag hanging over the bar, and I saw when I woke up my hotel room, you could see a flag here in Charleston. It's the same flag that hang over Dayton and El Paso, right? What unites us is bigger than what divides us.
Our latest Post and Courier Change Research poll shows you are polling at 1% among South Carolina Democrats. About a third said they've never heard of you. And
Well, then I got a lot of way to grow.
nationally, you are polling at about 1%. Why haven't you had your moment yet?
Okay, so it's a little higher than that. I wouldn't have made the debates. Okay, let's start with that. I made the fall debates, okay? That are over in a number of polls, and I made the fall debates, and that means that I'm ahead of 18 people, including every governor and the mayor of New York City. Okay, that's bad, right? Okay, so I think the first thing is that I do come from a mid-sized, smaller state, right? And it's not always easy when you look at the polling numbers of people like Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, to name a few presidents that came from the South. At first, people don't know who they are, and their numbers that they were never ahead at this point, not even close in these races. So that's the first thing to remember. If you're coming from a smaller place and less name ID and you haven't been running for president, it takes a while for people to get to know you. So I actually think there's a virtue to the fact that I've gotten to where I am and I've made this cut for those debates. I think the second thing about me is, I would call myself a proven progressive, which means I've actually gotten things done and made progress. However, maybe I am a little more moderate in tone than some of my other opponents. And I have had, I'm talking about the way I am, okay? I can't change that really. But that doesn't mean I'm not a fighter. One of my opponents in one debate, when I was first running on a lot of money, called me nothing but a street fighter from Minnesota's Iron Range. And I said, thank you. And I think that it takes time. And I think that I have had some moments. The Kavanaugh hearing was a moment, okay? Where people saw that when I got pushed by a guy that was basically on TV, asking me if I had blacked out when I was simply trying to match his testimony with the testimony of Dr. Blasey Ford. That's what he did. And I just was calmly said, I want you to answer the question. And that is what I'm going to keep doing in this campaign. And like I said, when people get to know me, I do well. And I think you truly want someone at the top of the ticket. When you got a guy that's told 10,200 lies, that's the Washington Post, has kept track of them. You want someone that makes promises that they're going to keep, that looks people in the eye and tells them the truth, that's willing to bring a ticket with me, which is something that when you're like that, maybe you don't just skyrocket up immediately because you're not saying wild things. But in fact, if you look at it, I have literally led a ticket every time because I think you don't just run for yourself, you run for a whole ticket. You run for people like Joe Cunningham. You run for people like the 2 women that just won in Iowa. You run for people so that we can build movement and that we can build the base to not just change a few laws in Washington, but to get money out of our politics, which we need to do state by state, big money, to get a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United. So that we can finally, in this state, get get a governor and a legislature in place that's going to stop, was going to be willing to get help when it comes to health care with Medicaid, right? So that you're able to get people in place that are going to really move this state forward like you should. So I view this as a national effort and that you don't leave states behind. My husband is the third of 6 boys. He grew up in a trailer home. See, this is why I want to have campaign financing that's fair. I didn't really marry into money. Okay? So he's the third of 6 boys, and his mom really wanted to have girls. She had 4 boys, and then she had identical twin boys. And they had triple bunk beds in a single trailer home. And every year they'd go on vacation in a station wagon. And he was such the good boy, the one in the middle, that maybe once or twice they left him behind at the gas station and drove away and didn't notice it. So my message to you is when I lead this ticket, I will not leave South Carolina or the middle of the country behind at the gas station. I think we've got to run for the whole country.
Are members of your party right now, especially those who are joining you on the debate stage, are they running too far left for the whole country?
I don't like labels because I think you can have all kinds of policies that I think we need to work on. Like I think we need to be very aggressive on climate change. I think I am been a long-time supporter for immigration reform, for comprehensive immigration reform. So I don't like those labels. I just think that we want someone at the top of the ticket that can actually bring people together and win. And that's why when I have done those debates, I have tried to use my limited time to take it some to Donald Trump. 2 things. 1, to make that economic argument, but 2, to show the contrast. And that's why, because I know very well there are people in South Carolina watching those debates. There may be conservative Democrats, there may be moderate Republicans and independents, some of whom voted for Donald Trump. And we need to get some of their votes back, okay? And we need to start explaining exactly what's going on. They know it inside. They know their drug prices have gone way up. They know this economy isn't working that great for them because the way to put the money. They know this debt that he's accumulating is not good for them. But someone's got to make that case. And I think that's how you lead a ticket and bring people in.
Bravo. According to the census, South Carolina's population is 27% African American. African Americans comprise only 7% of Minnesota's population. How does the senator from Minnesota pitch herself to South Carolina voters?
Well, I think you're specifically talking about African American voters. We have to, first of all, and by the way, Representative Clyburn has put forward some really strong policies that would really help in African American communities, not just in South Carolina, but nationally. And this, for me, starts with economic opportunity. When you have a situation where African American woman goes into an emergency room in Louisiana and says that her hand is swollen, and the doctor blows her off and she loses her baby, that's a huge problem. When you have got the African American women right now making 61 cents for every dollar that a white man makes, that's a problem. And when you've got African American vice president of a major company, told me this, goes shopping and gets followed by store security the whole time, that's a problem. When you have this unfair sentencing in terms of people being put away for long periods of time for nonviolent offenses with a much bigger impact in the African American, that's a problem. African American community. So this is what I would propose. First of all, we can't have a functioning economy if not everyone has a seat at the table. So that means making sure that we are having good funding for our public schools. My mom taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. I care a lot about our public schools. I went to public schools, and my daughter went to public schools, but she went to public schools that had very high percentages of kids with free and reduced lunch. One of them had 90% that she went for a few years. So I saw that racial disparity right there in her classroom in terms of having too many kids, not enough classroom teachers, the whole set of problems. So I'd start with that, with education, with putting more money into our education system, with making sure that we've got adequate care, maternity on, preschool. If you don't know as many words when you start in school, you're not going to do as well. And that's the facts, we know that. And then when it gets to other things like job opportunities and making sure that we've got mentors and people are able to get trained for not the job opportunities of the last years, but the job opportunities going forward. The second thing I touched on is the criminal justice system. So I used to be a prosecutor, and I saw the racism, that is institutional racism in the system. That's why I was in part one of the leaders on the sentencing reform bill called the First Step Act. I was one of the sponsors of that. And what that bill did was to reduce federal nonviolent offender sentences significantly, but we need to push that out to the Second Step Act, which will be creating incentives for the 90% of the prison population is in state and local jails, using drug court more. My dad had 3 DWIs, and on his third, he was given the choice between prison and treatment, and he chose treatment. And in his words, he was pursued by grace. Well, everyone, regardless of color or income level, should have that same right. And then the final thing I would say is voting rights. No one's going to be able to be part of our democracy if they're kept out of voting. If you had fair voting laws across this country, Stacey Abrams would be the governor of Georgia. Tens of thousands of voter registrations were held back because of things like hyphens in names. That happened. North Carolina, a court came out and said that they were discriminating with surgical precision. Those were the words. Texas, the Secretary of State of Texas, Trump's doing so much crazy stuff every day you didn't even notice it, but the Secretary of State of Texas had to resign because of what he was doing with purging voters and not allowing people to vote. This is against the very idea of our democracy, and that is why one of my priorities when I'm president will be to get our bill passed that I'm leading that allows every kid to register when they're eligible when they turn 18 across the country. That would literally allow 20-some million new voters, can you imagine this, in the country to come in. We make it so hard for people to vote, and it's not right. And I think all those things would make a huge difference.
Well, as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I would really like to get your thoughts on one of our South Carolina senators, Senator Lindsey Graham. He is one of two, but he is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, as you very well know. Do you see him operating with an even hand in that committee, or have you seen him inject politics into it?
Well, I was, of course, and Lindsey and I have traveled a lot together with Senator McCain. I miss Senator McCain very much. We were together. Where is our former ambassador of Estonia? Right there, Ambassador Melville. Yeah, he's some ambassador to Estonia. He somehow materialized at this event. So, Senator Graham and Senator McCain and I had dinner with him, and it was a very important trip. And this part of Lindsey's work I have appreciated, where he and McCain and I and others have stood up for democracies in NATO, especially in light of this president, because it is, well, you know, and you can tell everyone when I'm done, just what horrific things have happened in our State Department and our Foreign Service. And we worked together on a few bills, which I'll get to in a minute, Lindsey and I have. But, I mean, overall, I was very, very concerned with what happened during the Kavanaugh hearing, right? Because I couldn't stomach that the Republicans on one side were saying, oh, she's so credible in the morning. And then the next day came out with this full-throated partisan attack, which I think brought down not just the Supreme Court's integrity, not just in that situation, but really of all judges, what now Justice Kavanaugh said at that hearing. And so that really concerned me. And I just think that we need to have people that are willing to stand up to Donald Trump, all right? And that is what concerns me, what's going on here. I will say one bill that Senator Graham has done with me that is good, and that involves the social media companies. It was Kobuchar, McCain, and Lindsey has stepped into John's shoes to take this on, and that is called the Honest Ads Act. And what the bill does is it says that when people buy political ads, including in rubles, which is illegal, by the way, that the social media companies should have the same standards that this newspaper has, that these TV stations have, and that radio stations have. And that is that they got to figure out if things are true, but that they also have to say where the money is coming from that pays for the ad and keep the ad on file so we know what it is, all right? I cannot tell you what bad things happened last election. I will give you one if you want to talk about discrimination and racism. There was one ad, the God hates this thing. But listen to this. There was a African-American woman, she was innocent, from Chicago. They used her face. They put it on an ad, they paid for it in rubles, and they put the ad on Facebook pages of African Americans in swing districts. And the ad said this, last few weeks of 2016 campaign: vote for Hillary, but don't stand in line. You can text your vote at 86135. That is a crime. That is a crime. But they never caught who did it. It's paid for in rubles. We know who did it. But it went through these multi-billion, two of them now, trillion-dollar companies. And when I later asked them, well, I don't understand why you won't be for my bill. They eventually, somehow after Cambridge Analytica, Zuckerberg said he was for the bill. I don't know. But before that, they weren't for the bill. And they said, well, it's too hard for us to tell what issue ads are. And I said, seriously, because my radio station in Thief River Falls, Minnesota can figure it out. And you are $1 trillion. So I do not want you to overlook the importance of taking on those companies, and that's a bill I have with Senator Graham.
You voted for Justice Kagan, you voted for Justice Sotomayor, you voted against Justice Gorsuch, and you voted against Justice Kavanaugh. Are you predisposed to voting against Republican nominees?
I have voted for some Republican nominees, actually.
Can you get the names?
Well, they're not Supreme Court.
Okay, just wanted a clarification point.
Yeah, no, not on Supreme
Okay,
Court.
thank you.
And I remember when Justice Roberts was nominated, I wasn't in there yet, but I said that I would not have favored him. So, I know, I would, no. But on the, I have voted for some on the district court level and the circuit court, and that is because I look at each judge individually and make a decision. You're not always right, but you try your best. And my problem with Gorsuch and Kavanaugh was beyond the issues with Christine Blasey Ford. It was when you look at their records, they were incredibly conservative on things like antitrust that I care a lot about. And that means that, you know, right now we're entering a new Gilded Age, which is not good for this state, where the power is in the hands of a few companies and you don't have enough competition. And we need to have more competition with small companies being able to compete. That isn't happening. And these guys have been even more conservative than the existing court when it comes to antitrust. Administrative decisions. They've been very bad on some of the health and safety decisions. And most significantly, with Justice Kavanaugh, was his track record on executive power, where he deferred to the executive for anything. I mean, he had the same with Attorney General Barr, by the way, when you looked at their records. And that was a thing that actually really concerned me about Kavanaugh, beyond what happened at the end. Was his record and his decisions when it came to executive power, which were right there for us to see because he had been in the D.C. circuit. So I just don't think these judges are acting consistently when you look at their records with the law and with precedent. Women's choice, I mean, it's just down the line when you look at what they have done. It is just not consistent with precedent. And I would put judges in that respect the law.
All right, we're going to shake things up a little bit, and we're going to give you what we're calling your 90-second question. We know that you have a plan for 100 days of action for your first 100 days, but we would like for you to tell us your plan for your first 100 days in 90 seconds. 90 seconds, okay? And I have a timer out. If anyone wants to fact check me, go ahead and pull yours out too. Okay. All right, ready, set, go.
The first bill I would introduce is the For the People bill, which is all about preserving our democracy. And then I believe you've got to do things and set a new tone in Washington. No mean tweaks, and a bunch of things you can do, which you don't have to need Congress to do. Get back into the International Climate Change Agreement on day one, right? Bring back those clean power rules. Reverse the domestic gag orders that they have put in place. Do all kinds of things that we can do that are better for our environment. And then, of course, you can actually do this on your own as president. Apply for a waiver to bring in less expensive prescription drugs from other countries. In Minnesota, we can see Canada Florida from our porch, and then introduce major legislation on infrastructure, mental health, all these things I've talked about. But do look at my plan. I don't just have plans, I have deadlines. And I think we need deadlines to get things done. You can do over 100 things in the first 100 days, and at the same time introduce legislation. 3 top priorities: immigration reform, to get that done in the first year. Economics, when it comes to everything from the tax bill to what we've been talking about here. And then the third thing would be climate change.
All right, 1 minute and 18 seconds. You did it.
We got a lot of good audience questions.
Really great audience questions, you guys. Thank you.
But this one was kind of a curveball, so we're going to try to see what happens. Given the recent retractions on the part of the accusers, do you wish Al Franken should not have resigned or would not have resigned?
Okay. There we go. So Al and I still talk fairly often, and I was not one. I was in a different place than some of my colleagues, and I did not call on him to publicly resign. I did talk to him through that time, and I felt that it would have been better handled in the ethics process. And in fact, only a week before that, approximately, the Johnny Isaacson, the Republican from Georgia, announced that it would go and be examined by the Ethics Committee. But there was a lot of people in the Senate that called for his resignation. He and I talked it through. Ultimately, he made his decision that it was the best thing for him to do at the time. And for me, this is way beyond that. I actually led the bill after that to reform the harassment policies in the U.S. Senate so that individual members, if they are found to have harassed someone in the Senate, an employee, that they would pay for it themselves and not have others, taxpayers, have to pay for it. And also to just change the waiting periods. And I think we actually have to see this beyond individual situations. For me, this is about the nurse in the hospital or the factory line worker and others, that we need to change the atmosphere and the culture in our workplaces, because you've got to have respect and you've got to have safe places for people to work. And then just ending with what Al's doing now. He has a podcast. He's been helping some of our one of our major tribal schools in Minnesota, and really help them to raise money for their school. And I've always said he'll have a third act, and I think it will be somewhat related to the work that he's doing now with the podcast, and he'll continue to advocate for what he believes in.
Let's talk about healthcare for a little bit, since that's a very important topic for a lot of people. Unlike many of your Democratic presidential opponents, you oppose a Medicare for All plan. What are the economics or the philosophy that you are taking on healthcare? And in terms of getting away from this idea of a single payer plan, is it an options question, a delivery question? What's your aversion?
I think we need to make healthcare more affordable. And we need to bring down the costs of premiums, and we certainly have to make pharmaceuticals more affordable. We have to do both. And you have to make sure we expand to universal health care. And I believe I have a bold idea on how we get there. It is just different than some of my colleagues. And I do believe in the doctor's creed, do no harm, all right? So, one of the issues with that particular bill is that it does say in 4 years on page 8 that they would get rid of any private insurance. So how I would do it is this. I would first of all introduce a public option, which is something Barack Obama wanted to do from the very beginning. And it would create competition on the exchanges, but also you could do it for everyone. And the way you could do it is you could do it with Medicare, so that people can buy into Medicare. They could use their subsidies from the private exchanges to do it, and it would be much less expensive, I believe. The other way you could do it, interestingly enough, is with Medicaid. And with Medicaid, that is Senator Schatz has that bill, and a number of us, and Senator Sanders used to be on it actually, you would be able to buy into that bill, into Medicaid, and they're used to covering people of all ages. So I think both of those would be really good ideas and ways that I feel cool air coming in. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second is I have led, since I've gotten to the Senate, the major bills to take on the pharmaceutical industry. They have 2 lobbyists for every member of Congress. And they literally believe they own Washington, but they don't own me, all right? And they know that. I lead the bill that would unleash the power of 43 million seniors to allow them to negotiate prices under Medicare. And I also lead the bill to bring in less expensive drugs from other countries. So nearly 20% of our healthcare costs. One thing I would add for South Carolina, rural hospitals. You have lost 4 in just the last few years. And I believe we have to get those to stay strong. I have a lot of them in my state, critical access hospitals. I've got a bill to designate another level of rural hospitals with emergency rooms as critical access. And then to get personnel to staff them, we have to expand a bill that I lead called the Conrad 30, which allows for people who are from foreign countries who study in our medical schools, are in good standing, that they don't have to return back to their home country to do their residency, that they can do it in underserved areas, rural and urban. So these are mental health. We do not have enough mental health beds in South Carolina. Just to give you one sense, because I know this number, in Iowa there are only 64 public mental health beds for their whole state. And you've got doctors that don't know what to do with people with mental health problems. So I think that's got to be a major thing. I would pay for it with that and pay for addiction services with all the billions of dollars that we're going to get from the people that got hooked people on opiates to begin with, and that is the pharmaceutical opioid companies to do that. So that is a tour through what I would do on healthcare.
All right, I was just given the 10-minute warning, so we're going to ask one question.
You guys all hear me back there?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We're going to ask one more question. Is that better? All right.
Yeah.
Hold it close.
Politicians know how to yell. Journalists, they're a little more quiet.
I write, I don't speak. So, we're going to ask one more question, and then we're going to do a lightning round, and then we're going to give the senator the last word. But thanks to the tradesmen, they've done very well. Thanks for having us here, and we're going to go to them. South Carolina, we are the 6th worst state amongst rates of women murdered by men. Additionally, the state's domestic violence homicide rate is more than 1.5 times the national average. You are an advocate of the so-called boyfriend loophole.
Closing it. Closing it.
Yeah, close. How would that work, and would that stay with an individual forever?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. So, I am well aware that we are here in Charleston, where you had that horrendous killing at Emmanuel Church. And I see a sea change going on right now when it comes to guns. And I saw it after Parkland, because I saw those students, they became just heroes to so many kids across this country. And it wasn't just them, they inspired other kids to ask their dads and their grandpas and their moms, look, we love hunting in our house. I've come from a strong hunting state, and South Carolina is a strong hunting state. So I always look at these proposals and I say, does it hurt my Uncle Dick in his deer stand, okay? And it could be a duck blind, all right? But it doesn't, and I think we need to take that issue on. That is why I was just in Little Rock, Arkansas talking about this. Why I was in really red areas of Iowa talking about this. And I was not surprised at all when a Fox poll came out just this week showing that vast majority of people in this country, including Trump voters and hunters, want to see sensible gun safety legislation passed in this country. I sat across from Donald Trump after Parkland because of my leadership in this closing this boyfriend loophole, which by the way says that right now our law says if you are convicted of a serious domestic violence offense against your wife or husband, you can't get an AK-47. But if you are convicted of it against your girlfriend, you can. That is insane. And that bill is now sitting on Mitch McConnell's doorstep with a universal background check and closing the Charleston loophole so that, in fact, if the police don't finish their background and vet people in 3 days, you can't go out and get a gun, which is exactly what happened in that case. So, let me just say this, NRA. I sat across from Trump. I watched 9 times he said, I wrote it down on hashtags. I have the piece of paper. 9 times he said, yeah, let's pass universal background checks. let's get this done. Yeah, put it in the bill. The next day he met with the NRA and he folded. So I'm telling you, when I am your president, I will not fold. Okay? You can literally close the boyfriend loophole. You can do that as president without going to Congress, so that's one thing. But these other things, I hope we get them done before I'm president, because we are going to get back to Washington, and we're going to keep pushing. And you've already seen Republicans, including Senator Graham, want to do the red flag law. But to me, that is good, but that is just the beginning.
Right.
We have got to do that, and I would personally limit those magazine sales. Those are, and assault weapons, military-style assault weapons. When you look at this, let's look at this. In 30 seconds, that guy in Dayton, 30 seconds. The cops did everything they were supposed to do. They got there in 1 minute. In 30 seconds, he killed 9 people. That guy should not have a gun in America.
All right. We're going to start the lightning round.
This is the fun lightning round,
Okay.
and then after this, you're going to get to close it out, Senator.
Greenland is the land of Vikings. Should the United States buy it?
Greenland is not for sale. That is, I mean, again, you know, I think he says a lot of these things because he just wants to be provocative every day. But as you know, it is not for sale. They have made that very clear. Denmark and Greenland have made that very clear. And I think what he should be focusing on right now, for the good of South Carolina, is getting back to the negotiating table with China, so that we don't have farmers going out of business and our manufacturing going, because of what he's doing. We need to have a smart policy in this country when it comes to trade policy. And by the way, maybe he should be standing with our allies instead of coddling Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. And that is what I would do in my phone call. And I would add, how about getting back into the Iran nuclear agreement instead, where they have now blown the cap, instead of talking about buying Greenland, all right?
What is the best food that you've had in South Carolina? Please be specific.
Okay, I will. I just had the banana pudding.
From where?
That was so good, at someone's house.
Okay.
And this is so bad, I had everything, so but now I'm going to have the beer. But I had a peach cobbler, because peaches are so important, I know.
Thank you for recognizing
I had some fried chicken. I had some ribs. And then I had a wonderful biscuit this morning. And what was the name of the place?
Callie's Hot Little Biscuit?
Yeah, it was so good. So I had this blueberry biscuit, and then I happened to meet an entire bachelor party. I'm like, you guys are not that wild that you're at that biscuit place in the morning. And so we had a lot of fun there. So yeah, I loved all those foods, but I will say the banana pudding was my favorite thing.
Hubert Humphrey or Walter Mondale?
Oh, no. I met Hubert Humphrey a few times, and he was, as you know, the happy warrior of Minnesota. And he was the happy warrior for the country because he believed in bringing people together, and he stood up for civil rights at the 1948 Democratic Convention. What I love about Hubert Humphrey is he had this way of showing, yeah, I'm from the middle of the country, but I still didn't care about everyone throughout the country. So if you ask about civil rights and representing African Americans, we even had less percentage back then, and he did it very well. Walter Mondale, my own personal mentor, here he did so much internationally, was a strong vice president to President Carter, great model. They were still actually, Jimmy Carter came out for Walter Mondale's 90th birthday at age 91 and spoke. And I will say this about those two. I went to Atlanta to the Carter Library, and I saw some words on the wall, and they were Mondale's words looking back at their 4 years, which were, of course, imperfect. But he said this, and at the time Trump wasn't in, I wrote it down, put it in my purse, and it said, we told the truth, we obeyed the law, and we kept the peace. We told the truth, we obeyed the law, we kept the peace. I don't think we should expect anything less in a president, right? That is the minimum that we should expect in a president.
Who is your biggest threat in the 2020 field of Democrats?
Oh, you kidding me?
No. Please play along.
No, I'm not gonna. I will just say, many fine colleagues running. I just view this that you've got to make your case to the American people. You really do. And I'm hoping in these next debates, as they're going to get smaller, people are going to be able to make decisions, see people more, see their weaknesses, their strengths, and everything else. And that's what democracy is about. And we've had fields before that were not quite this big, but we're half this big. And that's about the number you're going to see on the debate stage as we go into the fall, with many more to come. And so I hope people will support me, amykobuchar.com. As I said, I've won every race, every place, every time, all the way down to elementary school, where I have discarded my slogan then, but it could give me that viral moment you were asking about. It was all the way with Amy K.
And June number 6. All right. From a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being poor, 10 being incredible, rate the effectiveness of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
Oh, I never give ratings. This is not just in her case. I don't agree with some of the things that Ilhan Omar has said. She is from my state. She is a refugee from Somalia. And I don't agree with some of the things she said about Israel, and I've made that very clear. But at the same time, I think that you do not have a president of the United States suggesting to an ally that Congress members should not be able to visit their country. I think that I was actually very pleased that the major Jewish groups in the United States, including AIPAC and of course J Street, came out against, which is very rare, what Prime Minister Netanyahu had done, as well as what Donald Trump had suggested. Because I don't see allowing people in that don't necessarily agree with you when you're a democracy is a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of strength. And I think that exporting intolerance is a true sign of weakness.
All right, this will be our final question. But first we want to say on Wednesday we're going to host Seth Moulton. He's a congressman from Massachusetts at Palmetto Brewery at 5:30. Everyone come out again for that. Same deal, same free, and have a beer. So just think that Wednesday at Palmetto. Last question.
The beer is not free, but the tickets are. Sorry, guys. We're a newspaper, okay?
All right,
They're not a social media company.
The one word that comes to mind when I say this person's name, Lindsey Graham.
I will just say colleague, someone that I work with, and I'm going to leave it at that. So I want to just, could I end here?
Yeah, we'll give you the last 2 minutes.
Okay, all right. Okay. So I want to thank you for coming today, and I want to let you know that if you just get sick and tired of our politics right now, I want you to remember the march that we are on. It started the day after the inauguration when millions of people, including in this state, peacefully marched, right? Yes. Peacefully marched across America. And then you go, fast forward to the next day when 6,000 women signed up to run for office. Then you go to day 10, when that anti-Muslim order came out, the travel ban, people spontaneously showed up at airports across the country. They showed up at non-international airports, all right? Then you go to day 100, my favorite march, the March for Science. My favorite sign, what do you want? Science. When do you want it? After peer review. Then you go into the summer. This is the March Run, where the Fighting 48 Democrats stood up together as one, joined by 3 Republicans, including Senator McCain, and voted down the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. You go to that fall, which were the first glimmers of hope electorally, when legislators won in really hard districts in New Jersey and Virginia. My favorite one, there was a guy in New Jersey who the day of the Women's March has said, I hope they'll be home in time to make dinner. He got defeated by an African-American woman. Then this incredible victory for the South against racism and for dignity and decency. That fall, Doug Jones won in the state of Alabama. Right? That happened. Then you had the tragedy in Parkland and those students marching, and then you go into last call in 2018, which thanks to you, South Carolina, and the victory of Joe Cunningham, we once again made the House of Representatives back into the people's house, okay? That happened. That is the march that you're on. So whenever you feel like you can't stand it anymore and you want to put your blanket over your head and you don't want to look at a tweet, well then retweet my Greenland tweet. And whenever you feel like you don't want your kids to watch this guy on TV or you got to turn down the sound, yeah, do that. But remember, there have been times, most of our country's times, where people were proud of our president, even if they didn't agree with them or they hadn't even voted for him. They wanted their kids to know who the president was. They wanted them to understand the flag and what it meant. They wanted them to understand what our country is about. Remember that those times aren't that far away and we can bring them back again. And I have a lot of my colleagues are making a lot of promises, okay? But I'm going to make you one promise. Well, two. One is I will win, okay? And we will bring the country with us. But the second promise is that I will govern with integrity and be a president you can be proud of.